tardes, Tucson, Arizona, Tijuana in the house. Yes, I'm Luis. I come from Rampa Independencia, Colonia Independencia, Tijuana, Baja California. And I just want to say for those of you out there who are under fire lately, proud veteran of Mexican American Studies. Yeah. Anyway, you know, our program in California, which will never be done away with and never be censored, has produced countless PhDs, authors, teachers, writers, and scholars. So I just want to say, those of you who feel under siege, you must understand the one thing that those who push you around fear. It's not your anger, it's not your power, it's your love. Look around you. It's about love. So I was glad that having talked about Nobody's Son, since I'm going to read from Nobody's Son, I thought it was appropriate because U of A book did it with University of Arizona Press, and I just wanted to bring it home. Some of you may know I lived here for a while. I lived in the Elysian Grove Market down in Nevada, and then I lived over here on North Line, in a little tiny white adobe for a while. And you know, I feel very close to Arizona. I'm a little leery to talk too much about your travails here because I feel like I'm a carpetbagger in a way because I'm not from here, but I did live here for a while, and you gave me my best books, the best things I've been able to do. So I feel close to this place, and I hope everything works out. So let me tell you a little bit about this piece I'm going to read for you. I thought for the Day of the Dead, you know, it was really important for us to make sure we honor our ancestors. I'm thinking about mis ancianitos, but there were a lot of young ones gone too. All the people who have gone before me. I think about my aunt, Teresita Urrea, La Santa de Cabora, the Mexican Joan of Arc, gone. I think about my parents gone, my grandparents gone, my godparents gone. My aunts and uncles gone. Several nephews and cousins gone. And I have to tell you, I will be damned if anybody tells me that they are less than human. Somebody tells me they should be stopped in the street and checked, or they shouldn't learn about their culture. I will not abide by it. So I wanted to read you a piece about my godparents in honor of them, and in honor of your ancestors as well, those who went away. Remember, it's about love. It's from this book. It's called Sanctuary of Peace. Mama Chaya saved my life. She allowed her husband, the mighty Abelino Garcia, to believe he had saved me. But that is the way powerful Mexican women work their medicine. They let men play act and strut while they work their medicine quietly and run the world. Healing has a woman's face. I had come out of Tijuana, ragged and skinny, fighting for life. I was 4.5 years old. I had already survived German measles, intestinal infections, chronic bronchial infections, and scarlatina. By the time we crossed the border in the United States, I had a skin ailment that was eating bloody gashes into my skin, and I had tuberculosis. Our good neighbors in that poor 1958 barrio wanted to help, but I, tucked into the corners of couches, coughed like a tiny duck holiday. They had children too, and they became convinced I would infect them all, and they reluctantly banned me from their houses. My parents both had to work. They were desperate for some place to park me. The situation was hopeless, which of course is when miracles happen. My father was working one of the many tiresome, depressing jobs that would occupy his attentions for the rest of his new American life. He was a bread truck driver, a busboy, bowling alley attendant, janitor. In 1958, he had a job canning tuna at Starkist on the edge of San Diego Harbor. My aunt got him the job. He stood in his spot on the line from 7 in the morning until 6 at night. Sometimes he'd move off the conveyor belts and gut fish with steel blades on long pole handles. Sheep-sized fish came on chains toward him, and he unzipped them with his giant razor. Avelino worked in the slot next to my father. And when my father told Avelino, "Mi hijo tiene tuberculosis, no hay nadie que lo cuide," Avelino said, "Yo lo cuido, tráelo a la casa." My father would leave home at 6 a.m. for work. I would stand beside him in the 1949 Ford tucked up behind his shoulder, feeling the hugeness of him. We would drive to 420 West 20th Street in National City, California, and there Avelino would be waiting, and all of the women of the family would be lined up on the porch to receive me. My father would hand me off like a little bundle to the women, and the two men would drive off to work. Mama Chayo and the women folk of the house bathed me and put their green powders on me and kidded me for years about the sorry state of my skin when they saw me. This is how the rescue operation developed. Father bundled me up at dawn. Avelino, and he would drive away, and the women would unwrap me with the presents. They were surrounded by geraniums in their yard. She had bred her own strains of geraniums. Some of them had navy blue flowers with sky blue edges, and when we pulled up, the women rushed out and flew down the steps, and they'd steal them from my father's arms. It became obvious I wanted to be at West 20th Street more than I cared to be at home, so the daily routine expanded into weekends. I lived with Mama Chayo from Friday until Monday. After a couple of years, preschool and kindergarten consumed my days. I always hated school, even in college. I think back on it now and know I hated it because I wasn't in her house. How do you tell a story that cannot be told? I tried to explain the simple story of Mama Chayo for 20 years. I found that as a writer, I had to back into the facts. I had to hide the story in poems, as though that act could tell it for me. It took me years to be able to tell you this. Things were still full of wonder in that house. Perhaps it was because I was still so young, though Mama Chayo was already old, and her capacity for wonder was not diminished. Maybe it was the times, maybe the millennium is too late a date for small miracles, but I can still remember mundane things. They had a glow about them, as they were part of some sort of revelation. Like the day I first ate sliced bread. I can't believe it. I'm tapping that laptop computer, listening to a CD changer playing 9 Inch Nails, and I first ate sliced bread one day. I had been raised on tortillas, I had eaten bolillos, but Mama Chayo brought this stuff on a plate with another magic potion called La Pina Bara. I was flabbergasted. They didn't call that stuff Wonder Bread for nothing. The relentless contrast between West 20th Street and my small apartment in the hood certainly made the enchantments of their garden more vivid. At home, I was under siege from angry neighbors, scary vatos, and the parental jihad within. The weather report for the inside of our apartment, shadowy, with growing gusts and areas of darkness. In Mama Chayo's house, however, everyone was loved. Period. There was always enough love to go around. Nobody was too tired, too angry, too depressed, or too tipsy to love. By love, I don't mean drippy sentiment. Nobody at West 20th made goo-goo eyes at anyone else. Love in that house was a bedrock fact, not discussed, not fretted over, never analyzed, barely recognized. Love simply was. There is a way in which a family rises in the morning that says love. There's a way in which a family shares one bathroom that says love. There is even a way in which a cup of coffee at 3 o'clock on a slow, rainy day says love. Sure, they got rainy. They got fed up. They hollered at me. After all, I was a boy. I would thunder through the house and I would hear, "Niño condenado!" Mama Chayo and Avelino had been married forever, and they still loved each other enough that they could love everybody else. True love seems to be as spiritual loaves and fishes. It doesn't get used up. It keeps regenerating itself to feed all comers. Maybe that is what religious books really mean when they bandy about terms like living water. I think it fills up your heart. Then it starts to overflow and water everyone else's. Sharing their house with them were their twins, Gena and Fina, my first sweethearts, my older women. Gena, the sorrowful one, went out every day to clean houses. Fina, the sunny one, stayed home every day to clean the one house. I pursued Fina relentlessly, fascinated by the world of women. Occasionally, a ranchera song came on the radio that was so rabid in its accordion that Fina would cast away her broom and we'd dance like maniacs all over the living room, while Mama Chayo cackled. We were especially fond of the shark song, "Tiburón, tiburón, tiburón a la vista." That would get us booty shaking in a fashion that Avelino would have exploded in rage over if he wasn't outside killing termites. Gela, so mysterious when she returned home from those strangers' houses, so tired and beautiful in her sleepiness, wearing that strange magic of el lipistiki. I would watch her etch in the lines around her eyes, watch her hit herself in the face with her powder puff. She even let me watch her snap her stockings onto her girdle snaps. I thought my favorite. Sometimes I'd sneak in her room and taste her lipstick. On Saturdays, her day off, Gela would sit at the work table in the kitchen and sort the beans. That sounds far less enchanting than it was. Her graceful hands with their slightly long nails moved like dancers over the surface of the table. The pinto beans, hard and clacking like dominoes, swirled and skipped beneath her fingers, and without looking, Gela could spread and scatter hundreds of beans, all the while flicking out broken and rotted beans, sliding aside twigs and pebbles. At the same time, as if she'd grown a third hand, she was swishing good beans into the cooking pot she held in her lap. Both sisters made tortillas every day. I attended the tortilla making each day as if it were a religious ceremony. It was clearly an ancient ritual. Every morning, from the days of Aztecs making tlaxcaltines, Mexican women made tortillas. My father, an avid history buff, pointed this out to me. Gela or Fina would assemble the materials. They'd mix and knead and make dough balls. The dough balls would be sprinkled with dust of white flour, and the rolling pins would hit the dough, traveling in the shape of a cross, and somehow the ball of dough with 2 hard passes of the rolling pin would be transformed into a perfect disc. Whichever sister was not creating the tortilla would transfer the raw dough onto a heated flat pan, where she used the wad of cloth to pop the blisters as the dough cooked. No matter what kind of dough Mexicans make their tortillas with, maíz or flour, all Mexicans, from the days before machines, from the days before tortilla presses, have recorded within them the sacred rhythm of 10 million women passing life through their hands. Their palms drummed out a steady cadence that set the background beat for the music of laughter, gossip, coughing, arguments. All around the beat, there played the melody of frying, of pots clanging, of knives chopping, of water and plates and cups, and spoons ringing, the ancient prayer. Every time the hands came together, a prayer for our future. Every time the hands came together, applauding for our future. I tried to make tortillas, they looked like underpants. Nina was usually asleep. She was that fabulous old woman who commandeered the sewing room at the side of the house. It was on her old iron bed from the turn of the century, tucked in behind her sewing machine, that I slept. She had been taken in by Avelino many years before I was born, and she was the twins' godmother. Avelino and Mama's comadre. Nina was ancient. She was 90 years old when I was born. She was 90 years old when I graduated college. She wore blocky, black, old woman shoes as she slowly wearied of sewing and crocheting, and her hands would dip slowly, and she'd nod, and her eyes would slowly close, and the white whiskers on her chin would tremble as she started to snort. Nowadays, I suppose she'd be recognized as the crone, the storehouse of female wisdom. To me, she was the source of mystery. And in that home, mystery was a comfort. I never knew if she'd been married or had children, or even if she too had come from the past. I couldn't even imagine if she'd ever been young. Her hair was a nimbus of white cotton, and her cane, which seemed like a forbidden thing of power, an object of awe, was dark wood. Her magic wand and her weapon. She once battered a purse snatcher over the head with it when she could still perambulate around the neighborhood. As time rolled on, Nina could only move from her bedroom to the sewing room and back to the living room to watch television. She rocked as she walked, heavily swinging back and forth while her cane thumped the floor. English troubled nobody at West 20th Street. Mama Chayo engaged in long, warm phone conversations with my mother that consisted largely of pidgin English, pidgin Spanish, some sort of customized Swahili, and a lot of giggles, and humming. Neither Mama nor Nina could pronounce Phyllis, my mother's name, so they happily mangled it in variations. Doña Phillips, Señora Felisa, La Prips. She avoided learning good English cuss words, otherwise, why bother learning English? God's name in vain in his mouth became a cry in an alien tongue. Oh, Jesus Christ! Or, oh, Katama! And Kelavina, who had reason to deal with the outside world more than their elders, created soundscapes that reasonably approximated English, kinds of songs that echoed messages that the Americans spoke. Hi, Fina would say, Favaju. And the Americano would say, I'm fine, thank you. And Fina would laugh and nod at everything the American said thereafter, even if she didn't understand. Nina and Mama Chayo, barely understanding a word of English, loved soap operas. Their #1 show was Edge of Night. Now, you soap fans always tell me I get this character wrong, so whoever the character I'm going to mention apparently wasn't in Edge of Night, but you'll forgive me. They had no idea what the title meant. They didn't even bother trying to mispronounce it. They identified the show by the name of their favorite character, La Jessie. What show was La Jessie on? Does anybody know? General Hospital? Dang it! Well, I'll revise this. Mama Chayo would shout, it's time for La Jessie, comadre! Ay, La Jessie, Nina would say, waking up. And she'd struggle out of her chair and thumb out to her personal corner of the living room. She sat in a rocker beside that gold spray-painted bust of JFK. Mama sat on the couch eating oranges. Well, she never really ate them. She chewed them. After she chewed all the juice out of the orange side, she'd spit the pulp into a bowl. Later, you'd find bright orange clots of her chewed pulp in the chocolate dirt of the mulch pile. Little moles in Mama Chayo's mouth feeding the vegetables. One day, Avelino and I heard a ruckus in the house. Women shouting. We rushed in to discover Nina and Fina and Mama waving their arms and bellowing at the television. Mama was leading the shouting. She waved one finger at the TV and cried, Jessie, no importa que hagas, pero no te metas en la elevadora! Doesn't matter what you do, don't get in that elevator. And Nina swooned and cried, ay Dios, la Jessie. Their garden was a kind of miracle, if only for this. Although it occupied one plot of land, it had two completely different places, depending on which of them led you out there. For Avelino, the garden was a place of endless productivity. It was where he went to raise the food we ate He had filled it with sugarcane, and quince trees, lettuce, and chiles, and nopales, and avocado trees. He grew corn, cabbage, tomatoes, onions, squash, olives, grapes. Mama Chayo, when she took you by the hand and led you out the back door, took you into a world of fluttering green. You were suddenly in the midst of butterflies, hummingbirds, mourning doves cooed to you. She grew carnations, geraniums, roses. Her fences were covered with honeysuckle. Avelino harvested peas. Mama Chayo collected sweet pea blossoms and showed me how they formed little doggy faces, and when you pulled the flower back, a tongue came out. The rhythms of the garden defined their days. The trees and the birds and the herbs were ready to go by the time the sun was up, and so was Avelino. He was the first out of bed. The sound of his side of their bed squeaking, his wide yawn, the snap of his suspenders in the dark, served as a subtle alarm clock for the rest of us. It was before 5 o'clock. We luxuriated in our beds for a few minutes as he slapped through the house in his wasted leather slippers. He navigated by memory, making his way up the hall, around the dining room table, into the kitchen. There, the first light of day would snap on, its gray glow accusing us of being lazy. He wasn't thinking about us. He was thinking about his morning constitutional, his breakfast drink. He called it garcida. He pulled down a large tumbler and cracked 2 raw eggs into it. Then he topped off the glass with about 8 ounces of the fierce red wine he made in his backyard. It was almost black and sweet as Moby David, and he guzzled it down in one long gulping pull, slurping the eggs out of the glass and gasping, sighing, belching, and slamming the glass down and heading out into the yard where he'd whistle all day long without any melody whatsoever. After Avelino's morning snort, the women rose. I'd lie in bed and listen as every quadrant of the house came alive with the ringing of chamber pots, filling up with the day's first cascade. Ring, mama. Ring and pring, que la final. And then softly in the middle distance, a muffled shh. Nina. My students are always grossed out by this. I don't know. A parade of women followed, carrying their musically sloshing pots to the bathroom, which they called the excusado, the excuse me. Fina would collect Ninas for her, a ritual of respect. The pots sang as the women walked. Duish, they said. Duish, duish. Around her flushing them, and the sound of murmurs and clothes being shaken out in the air, snapping crisply and silky slidings, and the rubbery crack of girdles, and bras popping into place, and the billowing sound of aprons. The day had begun. Tia and Fina went to the kitchen, and the aromas of dawn began to radiate coffee, lard, the scent of kerosene in the heat of tortillas. Nina said her rosary. Mama hustled out the back door to make sure Avelino wasn't about to massacre one of her pansy beds. Mama Chai always kissed you on the lips. She raised canaries, and the laundry room at the back of the house stayed warm all night, so she stacked her breeding cages back there. She made nests for the birds out of strainers, tea strainers, lined with threads. Each cage rang all day with such loud bird songs, you'd go home and still think you were hearing the birds. Sometimes I'd wake up in our apartment and think for a moment my parents had bought canaries. So intense was the illusion. Because the laundry room also contained 2 large sinks, the women of the house went back there to wash their hair, all except Nina, whose age had brought her into such a state of grace that she didn't need to bathe. All dirt and grime just lifted from her body and was dispersed in the air. One day I was tearing through the house, having escaped one of Avelino's impossible chores when I stumbled into the laundry room. I could have been seeing a ghost. I was so startled. There she was, Mama Chai, bent over the sink. She had the face of an Aztec queen, and she let her hair fall free. It was a waterfall, a veil tumbling over her shoulder. It had always been in a bun my entire life, and now it covered her like a shawl. She stood up and wrestled it back over her shoulder. where it fell as far as her bottom. Suddenly, my little Mama Chayo, in her home-sewn dress, in her old apron with her tattered cloth slippers and poochy belly, was a tall woman. She was powerful and fierce. She couldn't stop smiling. She was young again. She was beautiful. So it was all about love. Starting with love for each other. Every night, Avelino had come in from his pointless, busy days. And after the nightly feasts, huge meals prepared all day, he'd cruise over to the couch and recline. He'd pull out his dentures, spit a load into the spittoon, and settle in to enjoy a full evening of shouting insults at the television. Mama Chayo, having supervised the cooking, would relinquish the cleanup to the twins. She'd collect her latest crocheting project and take her traditional spot at the other end of the couch, where she'd chuckle at his outbursts. Nina, if she was awake, would say from the corner, "Ay, compadre, you're really funny tonight." But mostly she'd snore. When she started snoring, Avelino would nudge Mama and point Nina and laugh. I'd watch them for the special gesture, the special love gesture. I almost quivered with anticipation. Some nights it took forever. On other nights it happened right away. But it always happened. I wonder now if each knew the gesture was going to happen. And maybe, just maybe, they held back, sort of stalled to build anticipation, like saving that toffee crunch in the chocolate box for last. Maybe, even though they were my godparents, my elders, maybe this was a sensual delight for them. They had a lot of kids. They were sexy. They were in their 70s and they were sexy. So maybe it was one of those sexually as well as emotionally satisfying gestures, like when someone you love takes your elbow in the crowd, like when you hold hands, or when late in the night you reach out your hand and catch the cup with the hip bone of your partner, just to feel the warmth, the life there. Or when somebody absent-mindedly runs her fingers through your hair like a comb, like your fairy godmother's fingertips were on your scalp or your mom's, and it makes you want to cry, and it makes you want to go to sleep. Or maybe a palm against your cheek. I'd watch for it. Then sooner or later, Avelino's battered old slippers would come off, and he'd ease his legs up on the couch, and his feet would start to creak. His thin black socks would bunch around his rocky ankles, making a pouch in his toes. And those feet, first one, then the other, would move into her lap, like cats. His smelly toes would knock aside her crocheting project, and she would turn and put her needles aside, and she would then look at the television set, the lenses in her glasses reflecting blue light as though she were generating light herself. And then, never looking at his feet, she put her hands on them. She wouldn't massage them. She'd touch them, hold them, cup them, feel his arches and toes, run her palms up and down them. It was the most extraordinary thing, this foot fondling. And you could see his delighted toes in there wiggling around in his socks. Now, imagine the darkest day of our lives, when she died. It was sudden. A stroke, she stood beside their bed, on the side she'd slept on for 50 years, the side she had risen on every morning to follow him into the day. She fell to the floor beside the chamber pot where they found her, gone. And the funeral, which is where this is all headed. I want you at the funeral. Her children, her nieces and nephews and grandchildren, her acolytes, and me. Devastated. And Avelino, this hard old man, fierce, solitary, He spent the whole funeral attending to the mourners, patting my mother on the back, holding up the ones who went to the open coffin and collapsed. He wore a suit that looked like he'd owned it since 1948. At this funeral, I saw Avelino make the ultimate gesture of love. It wasn't for me to see, but like Mama Chaya's hair, it was a secret I was lucky enough to glimpse. And it has stayed with me all these years. Avelino's mute poem, his mute symphony. Right at the end, after all the many mourners had passed by, after my father had gone out to hide in his car, right before they closed the box forever and carried it to the hearse, Avelino stepped up to her. He didn't weep. He stood silently, gazing down at his one love, his one true destined love, the companion of more than a lifetime, and he studied her face. Then, with no emotion shown on his face, he reached into the coffin and put his palm against her cheek. His big, iron, calloused worker's hand. It trembled slightly and it landed on her flesh as delicately as one of her butterflies. Just 1 second, no more. But all the love in the world was there in his palm. All the love in the universe, and all the tenderness, and all the grief, and all the beauty collected there in his hand and lay against her lovely cheek. For the ancestors, just remember there's no them, there's only us. Thank you. Wait, I'm answering a question. I thought I made a clean break, man. All right. I'm hoping this is from me because I'm drinking. ¿Hay preguntas?
So we got 2 microphones, and
We have a question back here.
Oh, hi.
Hi, welcome back.
Thank you.
I'm David Rogers, about a year ago. So nice to see you again. So I have to do a 6-page paper on Venezuela that I'm procrastinating about and have performance anxiety, and it's putting off and I'm terrified, and I no longer procrastinate the worst we'll get. What's your advice for me procrastinate and terrified bad writers who don't want to start?
Sister, let me tell you something. My writing schedule includes ice road trucker marathons, deadliest catch marathons. Oh, Ghost Hunters is on, I better watch that. I think it's, I think it's part of the curse. It's just hard to get that ball rolling sometimes. You just hold your nose and jump. It gets better when you're not writing papers, I have to say. It does. Just remember, it took me 20 years to write Hummingbird's Daughter, world's worst homework assignment. And between that and the sequel, Queen of America, it was 26 years. It's not so bad.
We have a couple back here.
Oh, hi.
I wanted to ask you not about the book bannings here in Tucson, but about the TUSD response. That is, they claim that there is no book banning, even though they box books away, they put out lists, they instructed the teachers to take everything from their classrooms, etc. What do you have a comment about that?
Here I was trying to make friends. Yeah, that's a funny rhetorical thing that I'm not sure how to deal with. After I did the Bill Moyers show, there was a pretty angry letter about my lying and Bill Moyers being a bad journalist, which is not a good thing to to tell the Moyers. And then that letter was rescinded in a more formal lawyered up letter. So Moyers asked me to write a response and got some other responses. And I guess my take on it is, you know, my letter back was, I said, no pun intended, but you can't put this back in the box once you unleash something like a boxing. The rest of the world sees it a certain way. So I try to tone down my responses to this. I understand everybody has a side in it, but I think that you know, taking things away like books is a very bad idea. I do believe it's about books in brown hands, not books. And make of that what you will. If you look up Google and just enter Arizona book banning, you'll get over 28 million hits. So it's not just me that thinks books are banned. And it's a tough call, you know, but I think, you know, I think we're at a moment. I talked about your love. You saw it happen down there with the mariachis and the dancers and everybody to the altars, you know. I spend my life on the road. I'm on the road almost every week of my life, certainly a couple of times a month. I just got home from Hallmark Cards. That was awesome, Kansas City, Missouri. And before then, I had been to Amarillo, Seattle, Washington, D.C., New York City. I'm always on the road. And I've got to tell you, the number one thing people ask me about is, what's going on in Tucson? Over and over again. Over and over again. When the Moyers people called me, they said, what would you like to talk about? We'd like to do a Luis Urrea show. What do you want to talk about? I said, really? They said, yeah. I said, how about God and poetry and gardening? And the woman said, how about book banning and illegal immigration? All right. But you know, I think this is the thing about this place. This is a magic place. This is a blessed and sacred place. We forget. But Tucson, all the area around Tucson, Baja Arizona, is a very sacred place. And I think it's your chance to teach the country something in love. Love it back to health. Love it back to life. That's what I think. I think, you know, everyone's looking for what the response is, because people outside of here don't know what to think. I don't know if you've seen this, but Texas thinks they're really smart. Their big thing is, Texas is capital, not Arizona. You know, people are really curious what's happening. I think it's a time for love. I really do. I think it will triumph. You just have to be strong. That's all I'm going to say about that.
First of all, my name is Confluencenter, and it's an honor to have you here.
Oh, no, thank you.
What I was looking into was, I was trying to figure, you know, what happened to Teresa Urrea. She was buried in Clifton, but there's no grave or something like that. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah, the fear was that, you know how it is with relic hunters and so forth. There was so much madness around Teresita that she was buried in an unmarked grave. But she was buried beside Tomas, her father. So when I first went up to Clifton, beginning sort of the field research after doing book research, was in the 80s. And they hadn't heard of her. It was really strange. They were like, who? I said, Teresita. I went into the Historical Society, and it was really sweet because there was a huge picture of her on the wall. And the nice lady at the cabinet said, I don't know who that is. And I said, well, it's her. And she was like, oh, wow. Want a piece of Indian pottery? I said, sure. She knew pottery shrine. And I was cruising around town, and I went into the hygienic market. And there was a guy in there, he said, Teresita Urrea, you mean the bruja? And I said, well, I said she was a bruja. There was a thing in the paper yesterday, the copper urn. No, see, hombre, go down to the church and ask for flaco or something, you know. So I went to the church, and there was I said, is there flaco around? Sí, aquí está. Sí, que joven. I said, what's that? I'm here about Teresita Urrea. He said, go up the street to Alvi Fernandez's house. He wrote the article. And I said, I can't just go to his house. He said, sure, man, it's the house with the big flower pots. Toca la puerta. Y ahí voy, you know. And he came out. So we talked a lot about her history there, and I met some of the Aguirre family. so forth. So she was buried up there. The actual funerary materials say she was buried on Shannon Hill. But people have different locations now that they think she was buried at. In the 80s, when I went up to Shannon Hill, I realized that, you know, the really old graves are sort of toward the back, and there is one double grave with a little iron fence around it that has no headstone. Maybe. No one really knows, but I think there's some folks up there who have a good idea. You can go up there and visit the grave now, whether it's really the grave or not. No sé.
I got an email for the question, Luis, in which the person said that the Moyer's interview, you talk about your own home growing up in the border and how the border was really part of your own home situation. You talk about how your parents and you play sort of this game, and they're curious about knowing more about that.
Oh, well, I will preface that by saying I write about the border because it's just a metaphor for what separates us as human beings. It's visible, but there's stuff that separates us, witness some of the struggles here in town, from each other. And I'm always trying to answer that. You know, yeah, my mother was American. She was from New York. Her family was actually from Virginia. They had been plantation owners and slave owners in the Civil War and lost everything. Interestingly enough, my family, if you've read The Hummingbird's Daughter, the great haciendas in Sinaloa, you know, we lost those in the Mexican Revolution, so it's kind of interesting. I remember once when I was in Culiacan with my dad, he drove me out into the campo, you know, and he parked the car, and we were in these huge, huge fields. And he said, "Mijo, look to the east." Yeah, okay. Okay, now look to the west. I said, "Yeah." He said, that's your land. Too bad you lost it. I thought, wow, what? I'm not a poor kid, I'm a rich kid? They had all lost it. So they got married in a romantic swoon, and they were in Tijuana living this hard life, and their marriage was coming apart already when they got to San Diego. So we lived in a rough little apartment complex on National Avenue in Barrio Logan. And I always say that my mother's half of the apartment was the United States, my dad's half was Mexico, right? So my mother never learned Spanish. She tried to cuss in Spanish, tried to say que la fregada, but couldn't, so she'd say, "Oh, que la fregando." And she called me Luis. Luis, or dear boy. She had all these really odd sort of junior league of Virginia leftovers. She always wore little white gloves, you know, and had her little poses. She had little demi-tasse cups. My relatives would come over, and, you know, my grandma, Mama Lupita, she would serve her coffee in this little tiny Barbie cup, and they'd be like, and then my dad, he had the living room. And you know, I was Luis and Cabron. And there was a battle going on for culture of dominance in my family. Who wins? And my father was really concerned because I was now in the United States and I was speaking English more and more. My mom was speaking to me. She had literature. I can't tell you how powerful it was to encounter Mark Twain as a kid. My mom reading me Mark Twain at night. Wow. Changed my life forever. My dad was trying, you know, Pedro Infante, Agustin Lara. I was kind of going from Johnny Cash into the Beatles, so Agustin Lara maybe not. But my dad would try, and he'd bring me stuff, Cantinflas, Cantinflas. So that war always happened in my house, and you could see the border go right down the middle of the house. It never changed. I never saw my parents touch each other. I never saw them hug each other. I never saw them kiss each other. So you can imagine that Mama Chayo's house was a shock where everybody loved each other, because my house didn't have that. It was just not happening. So that's the thing. Now, to tell you, interestingly enough, we always think, well, I have to explain the border to the United States. You know, when you go into Mexico, you need to explain the border to Mexico, too. San Miguel de Allende has asked me to come down to explain the border. So I'm going to go down in February and say, "Viva la frontera!" It's cool, man. I don't know what I'm going to say. But I did an interview in Mexico City with La Jornada newspaper, and they asked me this very question. What's this thing about the border and you and the... So I told them this story. And I said, you know, if you really think about it, I said the barbed wire fence bisects my heart. And I thought, good task, good author quote, right? She's like, ooh, interesante. She's So it came out in the newspaper in Mexico City. This is what it said. If you cut Luis Urrea open with a knife, you'll find a Border Patrol truck idling inside his ribs. I said, nah, she didn't get it, man. It was a mystery to her. That's a little more Aztec than I was thinking. Is that it? No? Oh, there's another one.
Hi.
Hi.
This question is about decisions that you make as a writer. When do you choose to use Spanish in your writing? Like, does this come naturally, or is it a choice?
That's a good question. You would hope that everything in writing is a choice. Otherwise, you're just rambling out of control. So you know you're composing. It's as though you're making a piece of music. And I think writing is a manipulative art in a way. You've got to make your effects do certain things. And certainly in the prose, the fictional prose, it's different than the nonfiction. But for example, for Hummingbird's Daughter and Queen of America, I really wanted to write those books as though you were reading Spanish, but it's in English. I wanted that different musicality and rhythm. And so when the words will help it move along, they're great. And they establish things, which is a good word. But also there's cajita, yaki, and other things in those books. I often forget people don't speak Spanish and English. But sometimes I get these letters. You know, I got a letter from a woman who said, Mr. Urrea, what do you expect of your readers? Because there was too much Spanish, and I felt guilty. But I try to have a within context, always explanation of what it was, except one scene in the Beautiful North that gets me in all kinds of trouble. People chew me out. In fact, one critic actually said in a bad review of that book, the Mexicans speak too much Spanish. I thought, wow, okay. There's one scene in the book where the character Tacho has had it. He freaks out at the border and he just unleashes a paragraph of solid Spanish invective and cussing and yelling and blah, blah. And I thought it was really funny as a visual joke that you'd see that, you know, it's like if you're watching a Jackie Chan movie or something and someone starts chewing him out in Chinese. You don't understand the Chinese, but you get the vibe and it's funny. So I thought people would see a block of Tacho whose chest obviously hit the end of his rope, freaking out, but people writing me saying, I'm sitting here with my dictionary. So I feel like I blew it on that little joke. It was a little in-joke. I thought everybody would get. But I honestly think everybody grew up speaking Spanish and English at the same time, and I forget they have. But yeah, I do that. Now when I go to Mexico, if I'm in Mexico a day or two, I start to dream in Spanish. I didn't know I dreamed in English until I started dreaming in Spanish, which is very interesting. And then the writing totally starts changing and becomes a lot more Spanish than English. So it's just, I think, a process of how the computer works. But it's always, you know, for, number one, I think for my delight. I feel like if it delights me in the text, it might delight you. That's part of a big part of my job is giving you a good experience, you know, giving you the best carnival ride I can give you while trying to witness what I think is important. Here's somebody beautiful. Hi.
Hi. In writing The Devil's Highway, to what extent did that work take you outside of the realm of what you're more familiar with, or the realm that the experiential? I'd like to hear a little bit more about how you were able to put that it's not a novel, but it's
No, it's not a novel.
different. So you could maybe speak to that.
Well, I've been writing nonfiction for years. My first books were all nonfiction books. I felt it was within my experience. I have relatives who've been through that experience. The challenge was great, and I didn't want to take it at first. I did not. People ask me, hey, what inspired you to write The Devil's Highway? I say, well, an editor called and gave me a job. Hate to be practical, but yeah, it was a job, and I had kids to put through college. And I didn't want to do it, because I said, I've done several books on the border, I don't want to do anymore. I didn't start out this thing to say, I will be border boy. That's my future. I thought I was going to be Jim Morrison or something. But that's what happened. And when the assignment came, I didn't want to do it for a couple of reasons. One of them was I felt that the cost in human suffering was so high that I wouldn't be able to do justice to those men who had suffered. And frankly, I didn't understand how I was going to get involved with the Border Patrol. What would happen? I've talked about that a million times down here. But the Border Patrol was a hard-won courtship, and it took 4 months of real hard work to get involved with them, and that was really a wonderful thing for me. I had to immerse myself. I came in after the fact, so I had the smell of their rotting bodies, but I didn't actually have their bodies. I had their effects. I had their human grease-soaked wallets and things. So you just immerse yourself. The one thing I had decided was my other nonfiction books were all personal, so there were things that happened that are really juicy. And the book was phenomenons. It just won't stop. And it's almost 10 years old and it's still selling. I don't know why. Javi mentioned we've had 47 all-city reads. Most of them don't sell. I don't know what's going on, but I figure everybody must have read it by now. There's nobody left who wants to read it, but colleges do it. It's incredible to me. So I keep talking about it, but we're starting to plan for a 10-year anniversary edition, and I'm writing a whole new section of some of the things that happened to me. For example, one of the things that happened, I was with a local mystery writer, and we had a car crash with Mexican cocaine smugglers out on the reservation, and that guy wanted to kill us. They had cocaine and a pistola. So that was, it was that moment when I thought, I'd rather be home writing that haiku and gardening with my wife. But, it's all about immersion for me and trying to find the truth. And it was interesting, after the book came out, it'd been out a couple of years, I got an email from a guy. And he was the nephew of Raimundo Barrera Maruri. I don't know if you remember him. He's the guy who died with his son in the sun. His son was killed by the heat and then he died. And he wrote me and he said, nobody ever told us how our family died. Nobody in the government has ever told us this. I found out through your book. And I wrote to him back and I said, I apologize. I'm really sorry. But I wanted to tell the story. He said, well, you made one big mistake. I said, oh, damn, what did I do? I'm sorry, what did I do? He said, well, you said Maruri was indigenous. Somos mestizos. That was it. Everybody wants to be mestizos. And he came here undocumented. He went through school. He's at university now, getting a PhD in world economics. He told me, I'm coming back to the border when I get my PhD and I'm going to fix this. And I will quote him directly. He said, I want America to know what one wetback can accomplish if given a chance. Give me the chills. So, you just try to tell the truth as best you can, wherever it takes you. And I'm really lucky in that I've been able to write in the different genres. So they have different disciplines within the greater body of writing. When I was growing up, I was kind of naive, and I thought it was our job to learn everything. So I studied everything. I didn't realize you could just be a melancholy short story writer. I wanted to know everything. I figured it was like getting a black belt, right? You need to learn all this. So it's ended up, my foolishness served me well.
Well, thank you for that wonderful reading. And I just want to pick up on the question of, using Spanish in your texts and ask you about the translatability of your text then into, for example, Spanish. And how does that work then when you're using Spanish very strategically in your English text?
Yeah, I don't know if you knew my cousin Enrique Hobart Urrea, retired Mexican ambassador to the universe. Are you here? Ah, he's here. So I was working on Hummingbird's Daughter, and much of the vibe of Hummingbird's Daughter is about Sinaloa, where my family's from. And you know, I was lucky enough to be taken to Sinaloa several times to spend extended periods. And I have to tell you, this is kind of a roundabout, but it'll make sense to you in a moment. When I was a kid, we were pretty poor. The Hubbards weren't poor, so we would go to their house and I would be like, holy crap, I'm in heaven, right? And they lived in what was the closest thing to Macondo out of a Garcia Marquez story in the world. And for a kid from the ghetto, can you imagine? I was just like, this is magic. But I was insanely nearsighted. Like many poverty children, nobody understood that I had health problems, really. And it was his dad, Uncle Carlos, who told my father, you know, the kid's blind. He said, no, he can see perfectly well. I said, no, he can't see anything. So my tío Carlos dragged us down and got me my first set of glasses. So the first place I ever really saw clearly in my life, Rosario, Sinaloa. I don't know if anybody even knows that. So it became so internalized to me that I was seeing the stories and the fantasies that had come to me all my life. That I was then writing this story with Sinaloan roots, and it hit me all of a sudden because I tour so much. I toured in Guadalajara and Mexico City and so forth. People were calling me El George Bush because I had what they thought was a Tejano twang. And I was like, what? It's norteño. I was like, what? I didn't even think about that. So I wrote to Enrique. They'd asked me to translate the novel. And I was like, you know, I was in the middle of touring, and it's a big fat monster. And I thought, oh my God, you know. And then I was doing it, and it was awkward because I was just not getting this rich vernacular tone. So I write him and I say, hey, here's my problem. I said, you guys in Sinaloa have this, you know, wonderful, joking, funny, lilting, all these things that I don't have the ear to catch. So Enrique says to me, it's okay, I'll do a little scratch translation and I'll send it to you and then we'll averiguamos, huh? We'll just, you know, work it out. I said, okay, cool. Not ever imagining when politicians are, not saying he's a type A or anything, but the whole book came translated. I opened the box, I was like, damn! I can't believe it! And I mailed it to New York. And they mailed me a check. So it worked out. That's our family industry. So we did it in the beautiful North. Now, one of the problems, though, with the translation was that Little Brown was in such a hurry to grab the Latino market, whatever that is, that they launched Little Brown in Español with me, not having a single Spanish speaker in the entire company. So they had, you know, people with their pequeño la Rus going back and forth, and they went and got a Chicano from People magazine and dragged him up and made him, you know, so they made so many weird errors. They didn't know the grammar. They didn't know how words are split. They got, you know, verse, verb, subject, genders wrong. But at least it was done. Now, Spaniards did Hummingbird's Daughter in Spain. But they didn't, for example, they didn't like the word chuparrosa, which they said was inelegant. And I said, yeah, it's a book about ranchos, hello, ranch people. So they called it, in Spain, it's called La Hija de la Esperanza. And it's translated into very elevated Spanish, so it's not, it doesn't, you know, this book was about mud and sweat and heat, and this one's a little more elegant. So, you know, I'm booked ahead. And one thing that happens in life is you get booked ahead in several book projects. But once I get these out of my hair, I think I'm going to go back to more and more Spanish because I love it. But you know, you get out of the practice too. So you have to immerse yourself. If you're going to write Spanish, you need to read Spanish. So the poet Alvista, I don't know if you know him, Chicano poet, he was really brilliant, but he was actually from Mexico City, and he found a bright field in the Chicanos of California. But his rule was one English book always followed by one Spanish book. His entire life he's had that discipline. One English book, great. One Spanish book follows. So, you know, he would read Hemingway, and then he did his name. He would read Faulkner, and he'd go to always keeping the balance, which I think is really good. So, more coming.
Great, thank you. Let me remind everyone that tomorrow morning at 9:30 at the Lincoln Room, we're going to have a conversation with Luis as well, and we're targeting this conversation to students rather than the grad students that can join the conversation. 9:30 a.m. here in the Student Union, the Lincoln Room. And also, let me acknowledge some of the support that we have received from a number of folks on campus to make this possible. I want to thank the Asian Pacific American Student Affairs Group, the Chicano Spanish Student Affairs Group, the Binational Migration Institute, the English Department here at the U of A, Mexican American Studies, and the UN Confluencenter for Justice, Education, Diversity Initiatives, JEDI or JEDI, whichever you pick. And I want to round of applause for these folks.